Thank you so much, Sana. It's so important and it's so beautiful to start evenings like this with a performance with music, because I think the reason probably why we're all here together is because we feel called towards justice in our hearts, and it's important to connect to the heart. So I'm very grateful for Sana Landvreug's beautiful piece. My name is Hieronder Oursame. I will sort of guide you through the program today. I'm very happy to see so many people here, so many different people. I heard it was madness at the, let me not use ableist word, but it was very, very tense at the doors, and I heard that many people were disappointed they couldn't get a ticket, but you're all here, and it's really great to see such excitement about this event. Many of you have come to see Angela Davis speak. Her work has inspired so many of us, and it's activist and academic work that has contributed so much to economic justice and sexual and gender justice, to our thinking about migration. But people like Angela Davis and people like Gloria Wekker, people like Audre Lorde, their legacies, they serve also as catalyzers for us to come together, because these moments, they don't happen perhaps as often as we would like them to happen, for people to come together across, with all our different identities, across class and sexuality and gender, citizenship, and to think about, today we're going to think about what solidarity means to us, and how can we think through solidarity not only across space, internationally, using all the means that we have nowadays, using the internet, but also across time. Yesterday I had the privilege to be part of another event that's part of this week-long conversation, Moving Together. And it was an event called Sister, Sister and Friends, and it was one of the most interesting or special and touching presentations last night or yesterday was by Anne Kruk. And Anne Kruk is somebody who's been doing queer organizing. She was part of, or she is part of Strange Fruit, which is a collective of Black and people of color who are queer, trans, lesbian, and gay. And in the early 80s and all throughout the 90s, they came together and they helped each other survive and thrive in this world. They were a self-help group. They also did a lot of institutional critique, but most importantly, they really invested in their relationships with each other as friends, as people, who care about each other. They talked about stuff like, and helped each other when it comes to housing, when it comes to jobs, and all these types of things. And I was really touched because as a young activist, for me, it was difficult finding the people who've come before. So today, we're going to talk about many different things, but we're going to focus on intergenerational solidarity and solidarity in general. How can we hear the voices and work together, looking towards the past, looking at who all is here in the future, working towards justice, and how do new forms of loving solidarity help shape our senses of belonging in the future. We are racialized people, we are gendered people, we are people who are dealing with capitalism, and how can we shape our relationships with each other in such a way that we are more liberated in the future? We're going to talk about that with a beautiful team of people today. We have Olave Basabose. She's a writer and public speaker. She's also a queer organizer. We have Flavia Dzodan, who is a writer and a researcher. We have Nawal Mustafa, who's a scholar and a human rights activist. We have Gina Dent, who's a scholar and activist. Of course, also Angela Davis, who's a scholar and activist, and Joy Mariama Smith, who's an artist, an activist, educator, and a DJ. They're also organizing a party afterwards. Just saying. But they'll tell you something about that themselves. So we have people from the States, but also people who've been here coming at a later age in their life to share with us, but also people who've grown up here. So we have a variety of local voices as well as international voices, and I'm super excited to hear what they have to say. Also, because that's my role, I have to tell you can't eat. At the moment, right now, in this space. Also, you can't drink. I mean, if you really have to, or something like that, of course. But I mean, they would rather not, the people from this place. And also, it's really busy. If you see somebody who needs a seat, because we have all different abilities here in the room, then please make space. It could get busier as the evening continues. So, I will introduce. Everybody will introduce themselves, but I'll just tell you that Wayne Modest will speak now. He's the head of research here at the Tropenmuseum and the Museum of National World Cultures.
It's wonderful to stand here this afternoon. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Wayne Modest, and as Hodan just said, thank you, Hodan. I'm Deputy Director of the Tropenmuseum and also the head of the Research Center for Material Culture, which is the research center for the 4 museums that form part of the National Museum of World Cultures. I'm very pleased to be here today as one of the partners, the Tropenmuseum being one of the partners, in the organization of this amazing and humbling week-long event around questions of solidarity, intergenerational activism, and joined-up efforts to fashion other, more equitable and inclusive futures for all. My role here this evening is a modest one, and that's not because of my name. As I welcome you to the Tropenmuseum, indeed to the official kickoff of this week-long event with 2 very special and distinguished international guests, Professor Angela Davis and Professor Gina Dent, welcome. And with diverse activists, artists, and educators. You will hear more about them from Hodan. Already in 2012, when the Tropenmuseum merged with the Museum Volkenkunde and the Africa Museum to create the National Museum of World Cultures, we announced a new mission to stimulate world citizenship. For us, this was in no way just a buzz term, a facile cosmopolitanism, or a too easy universalism. Rather, it was a demand of ourselves and of our visitors alike for more critical engagement with and feelings of responsible for the human and non-human world around us, the world we share with others. Recognizing the history from which we had emerged as a museum, as many of you may know, the Tropenmuseum was founded in the 19th century as the Colonial Museum. It was important for us to ask ourselves what role could we play as an institution within ongoing attempts to better understand, explore, and shape our society today. Some would say that such a question is not one for a museum to ask. Museums, after all, as some people would think, are cultural and not political institutions. We beg to disagree. Yet, if you, as we believe, that our contemporary world has been and continue to be shaped by the durable structures of colonial formations, which are at least in part have resulted in the differential distribution of life chances, of hierarchies of worth, including in the arts and culture, or of precarity. Indeed, it has affected the very future of our planet. Then asking about the role of institutions like ours with our history and our collection is not a far-fetched, but an urgent proposition. This period in our own questioning has coincided with broader global struggles by diverse social movement groups against colonial durabilities, whether in the Rhodes Must Fall movement, Black Lives Matter, or the North Dakota Pipeline, in Museum Detox in the UK, coalescing, as it were, in a kind of, through the new media connections into a global decolonial solidarity movement. Such movements have underscored the need to rethink public institutions and their role today in maintaining structures of injustice and inequality. Museums have not escaped these critiques, so too have universities. We only have to look at the recent collaborative demand by diverse activist groups formed around intersectional solidarity for the Brooklyn Museum in New York to rethink its own practice around diversity, around land rights, and its impact in an increasingly unaffordable city. And in the Netherlands, we have seen the emergence of groups and individuals from Decolonize the Museum, the University of Color, the Black Archives, the Black Heritage Tour, that have been demanding presents and futures beyond empire, beyond colonial ways of knowing and being in the world. We at the Tropenmuseum have been listening to these calls. We too are committed to these more inclusive futures and have been working on what we can do to contribute to this. As a first step, it has been important for us to acknowledge and reflexively work through our own colonial histories and how these histories have impacted our modes of display and collections and the collections we hold. Together with some of you in the audience, we have been trying to develop new and more ethical practices that challenge colonial ones. We have been in a process of rethinking, from the way we write exhibition text to how we document our objects. Later on this year, we will publish a guide to word use in museums, to which some of you have contributed. We have been working on research and exhibitions programs to move beyond retelling of stories of the colonizer, to uncover the ways in which peoples from across the world have lived their lives otherwise, have refused and resisted colonial domination, have lived other gendered, sexual lives, and other ways of living with the planet. This we try to do, and have tried to do, with some of you here. This evening, however, is not about us. Tonight is in fact a night where we host and facilitate, together with a number of partners who we will hear about later. Being part of this week that foregrounds the lives and works of distinguished thinkers, activists, scholars, and educators, the work of many of you here who have been at the forefront of attempts to fashion more inclusive societies is, we hope, part of our contribution to this non-imperial future. Yours have been the work of hope, where there is often little reason to be optimistic, a hope that I have defined personally as a radical impatience for the way things are, but an acknowledgement that fighting the fight is a long-term project, one that requires a patient commitment. Yours have been the work of solidarity, as we in the Netherlands say, samenwerken, in combating the afterlives of the colonial past. If combating the afterlife of the colonial past is not, as Saidiya Hartman suggests, an antiquarian project, but rather the confronting of the real everyday structures of domination, violence, and inequality that it has left in its wake, then learning to work together to unravel its grasps, its tentacles, is undoubtedly as important now as it ever was. We want to be a part of this coalition, to provide platforms for this and similar events, but also to foster more critical approaches to our common histories and our role in the shared world we live in. We start by being critical of ourselves and invite your criticism. Let us work together. Let us move together. Ladies and gentlemen, let us enjoy today. Thank you.
I would like to invite to the stage all our speakers, Gina, Angela, Joy, Olave, Flavia, and Noel. Each speaker will give a short presentation, Joy will give a performance, and then we will have a conversation all together with each other and also with you. we have a lot of thoughts to share, and we have a lot of people in the room. So I'm going to be quite strict sometimes with time. I hope you understand. You can still hear me? Yep. Okay. We'll have a break in between where you can ask questions, but we're going to be super strict on time so that we have as much time as possible to exchange thoughts. So this is also especially a moment to listen, to get inspired, and to hear different perspectives. I would like to invite to the stage at first Noel Mustafa.
Wow. I'm afraid to speak after the warm applause that you have given me. My name is Nawal Mohammed Haji Mustafa, and I am the daughter of Asha Abdinoor Hashi and Mohammed Mustafa Mohammed. And I stand here before you today in their legacy, and in the legacy of my grandmother, Flavia Dzodan, and Halima. My family originates from Somalia. And I came to this country as a young refugee girl. I grew up in this country, never belonging. And today, I want to talk about all of the reasons why I do belong and I don't belong. I always figure out that I live in a space in between. I am never there, nor am I fully here. So I've always had to navigate spaces. I had to navigate institutions. I had to find myself in a world that wasn't created for me. So my talk today is really personal because I think my mere existence and my mere being here is something that has already been politicized before I was born. As many of you have known, Somalia is now a so-called failed state. But even before that, we were colonized by the French, by the English, by the Italians, and our mother tongue has words that resemble all of these foreign languages. But I also come from a legacy of warriors, and from farmers, and from people who have walked from villages in Somalia to Mecca in search for a religion that you have all come to know as something that's deathly. And one of the reasons why I stand here today is talk about all of these intersections, all of these battles that are seemingly being fought on my body. I am black, as you can see, and I am visible Muslim. But I'm never black enough in certain spaces, and I'm not Muslim enough in other spaces. Meanwhile, in society, my body is a battleground. When people view me or come and speak to me, they never speak to me as a person, but they speak to me as a Muslimah. I've had questions to choose, or as a black person. So I've had questions from activists, from friends, to be either black or Muslim, to be either Dutch or Somali. I never know what to answer. I don't understand how I can silence some parts of me and make other parts of me more visible. And this is something that I've always been struggling with, especially in academia, in activism, in all of the institutions that I have worked with so far. It seems that my narrative, or the narrative of those who look like me, are always erased from every possible imaginable narrative. And that's something that I want to question. People like me do exist. We exist in the universities. We exist in institutions such as this institution. We've always been here. And I see my role as an activist and as a scholar as the role of a witness. Whenever I'm in spaces that do not represent all that I am and cannot represent all that I am, I have the obligation to be there as a witness, to criticize, to listen, to bring forth the voices that are not heard, the voices that are missing. And there is always a part of me missing in whatever space that I am in. So what does solidarity mean? What does it mean to be a visible Muslim black woman dealing with Islamophobia, dealing with anti-blackness? And it's not only contained in the Netherlands, it's worldwide. Somalia is one of the countries that is named as in the Muslim ban that Trump introduced. I wonder why. Because Somalia is not, and I'm not justifying this, but Somalia is a country that has a lot of problems, but it is not a country that, let me rephrase that. Somalia is not a country that willingly engages has a complicated, let me say it differently. It has a complicated relationship with the United States. I'm trying to be a bit diplomatic, which I'm failing. So I wonder, why are we one of the 6 countries that has been mentioned? Why is it that we are sought out? And I'm honestly, I can't find an answer to that. So I was wondering about, how can I imagine a different society for people like me? How can we imagine a different future for for people like me? And I believe, honestly, if we can resolve whatever differences that we have, if we can look beyond the binary, if we can see the multiple identities that are present in each and every one of us, I do think we can find a different outlook on life. I do think we can find solutions. But in order to find solutions, we need to have complicated conversations. We need to be honest to each other, and we need to be willing to say that which is unsayable sometimes. So when I'm asked if I am Muslim or black, I state I'm both, because I don't have the option of choosing. I don't have the privilege of choosing. So for me, it's a key to repeat and to repeat and to repeat and to show my presence in every situation that I am in. So looking at the institutions now, I recently started working as a PhD candidate, and one of the issues that I've come across is that in this country, it's really difficult to talk about race. And somehow, I'm always drawn into these discussions, but also my presence calls questions. So I'm always in these type of questions and discussions that never seem to have an outcome. Recently, at the institution that I work at, I was walking, and we have a system in which you have to have a card in order to enter a certain part of the building. And I was walking in the building, and this has happened to me multiple times, but I was questioned what I was doing there. I was asked whether I was a student or whether I was a staff. When I specifically mentioned that I was a staff member, I was not believed. I had to show my card in order for my colleague to accept me, to accept my presence in that space. And when I addressed this issue and mentioned it and questioned it, I questioned the person who was asking me what I was doing there. What she said was, we have people coming in, and we have to, and we don't know who's coming into this space, and for safety reasons, we have to question that. So I was like, but I have a card, you have not let me in, so why are you targeting me? In which we replied that it wasn't something targeted towards me, but it was something for everyone. And when I said that I worked there, the first assumption the person made was that I was working at the secretary. I was not seen as a faculty member. I was not seen as a teacher. I was not seen as a PhD candidate, but I was seen as somebody who works at the secretary or somebody who comes in to clean the offices. I am not being disrespectful to those who work in those professions. I do think they do a lot of hard work, and they do deserve recognition for that. But what triggers me is that my presence in this university is reduced to being the cleaning lady or the secretary. I am never imagined to be the professor that I hope to be one day. So for me, it's the key to hold a mirror in these institutions and to question them, to always be the one who het ongezellig maakt in Dutch. So doing race work is not een gezellige bezigheid. So it's not fun, it's hard work. I choose to do this because my mere existence depends on this. I choose to do this because my 14-year-old sister should not get the questions that I'm getting now. I choose to do this because my mother was educated and is still working hard to be a part of this society. She's helping other refugees and being present and contributing so much more without getting any recognition for. So today when I stand here, and the reason why I'm saying all of this and why I'm bringing up these stories is because I think it's fine and dandy to be in this beautiful space, but it's so easy to forget those people. It's so easy to not see the invisible side of our society. And I think today, and in the past years, racism, Islamophobia is blatant now, but racism has become invisible. Racism has become something that you have to prove. As a legal scholar, I know that how hard it is to prove something that is well-meant, it's set in a joke, is never direct. So how do you prove when you apply for a job and you are refused or you don't fit the profile? But you send the same letter and you get invited to come and do a job interview. So I think it's complicated and it's really difficult to talk about these issues. But I do think I find hope in having these messy conversations within, in solidarity with each other. I think that it is important to disagree, to talk about what blackness is. Blackness and Muslimness is not a set concept. It's not a concept that you buy into. It's an evolving concept. It's something that is being reinvented as we go along the way. And I think it's important to realize that and to work with that. And people like me who can be a witness, who live in the gray zone, in the twilight, it is our job, how hard it is, how difficult it may be sometimes, to always voice the different opinion, to voice the voices of those who are not being heard. So I thank you, and I hope you enjoy the night. I forgot to say something about the picture. So this picture is a solidarity march in Somalia in 1972 when Angela Davis was imprisoned. So this is my legacy, and this is the people that I want to honor.
Thank you so much, Noel. Thank you for the work that you do as well, because it's also quite rare that somebody in the queue is also put on a stage and recognized. So I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, both towards the institutions and making spaces for others to come after you, but also when you are talking with your black co-organizers, and we were talking about those difficulties, like what is blackness anyway? You know, I'm Somali and Muslim, and can I, am I black enough? I just want to check in with you before we move on to the next speaker. How is the sound? Can everybody hear us? Okay, so if I stand here, can you hear me better? Do we need to speak louder? Okay, need to speak louder. Okay, perfect. And then in terms of feelings, how are you feeling? Okay. Show us some love, because it's not easy to stand on stage and... Thank you, and I just want to express appreciation for taking the time to come here and to talk about these things, because building solidarity, even when we're sort of hardcore activists, whatever that may mean, is so difficult, and our collectives break apart, and it's difficult to talk about these things with our families and our friends. So these things are not easy. And taking the time together today to figure these things out and to listen to each other is so valuable. So I really appreciate you for coming. I will pass the microphone to our next speaker, Olave Basabose. Give her a big hand. Where's Olave? Where's Olave? Okay. It's okay. We'll switch it up. It's totally fine. In that case, we're flexible, you know. Time is a construct, it's okay. In that case, can I look towards Gina? After, okay. In that case, I'm not in charge. Flavia, everybody, Flavia Dzodan.
Buenas noches. Buenas. Good evening. My name is Flavia Dzodan. I think there is a screen. I'm a writer, I'm a researcher, and tonight I would like to engage the work of Professor Angela Davis. I was going to call her Angela. I don't think she would mind. Angela. In her brilliant and thoroughly necessary book, Are Prisons Obsolete?, Professor Angela Davis painstakingly details the history of the American prison system and its inextricable ties to the history of racism, slavery, and the exploitation and criminalization of Black, Indigenous, and Latinx populations. In Chapter 5, The Prison Industrial Complex, Professor Davis writes, I quote, "The exploitation of prison labor by private corporations is one aspect among an array of relationships linking corporations, government, correctional communities, and media. These relationships constitute what we now call a prison industrial complex. The notion of a prison industrial complex insists on understanding of the punishment process that takes into account economic and political structures and ideologies rather than focusing myopically on individual criminal conduct and efforts to curb crime. The fact, for example, that many corporations with global markets now rely on prisons as an important source of profit helps us to understand the rapidity with which prisons began to proliferate precisely at a time when official studies indicated that the crime rate was falling. The notion of a prison industrial complex also insists that the racialization of prison populations is not an incidental feature." End quote. Europe is a project of imagination. Europe imagines itself, and by transitive property, the European citizen, as imbued with values of humanism, equality, and a peace that was forged on the ashes of the brutality of Second World War. The European imagines him or herself as a custodian of Western civilization, usually juxtaposing him or herself against the Americans, who, in their imagination, are nothing like us. We in Europe do not have the problems of the Americans, whatever that might mean. In this imagination, Americans have a prison industrial complex, but we treat our prisoners humanely. Scandinavian prisons, presented as a pastel-colored extension of IKEA brochures, and used as an example of how things are here and they are different. Americans, the myth goes, have a prison industrial complex because they have racism. We do not because we are equal. But, as the saying goes, a rose by any other name, a prison by any other name would still be a prison. Our European prison industrial complex is entirely devoted to keeping migrants detained, asylum seekers, undocumented immigrants, refugees, economic migrants escaping the poverty brought upon them by the globalization of neoliberal precarity. All of them housed in the most inhumane conditions designed specifically to detain. Paradoxically, the myth of European freedom is refused to the most vulnerable. The crime of existing while undocumented is punished with an intricate and profitable network of detention centers and the surveillance structures created by the corporations that profit from them. There should be an image behind me now. Can there be an image behind me? There. In the image behind me, which is a report produced by the non-profit Migre Group every year, each dot in the map, even those outside the European continent, represents a European detention center for immigrants. And make no mistake, this is a profitable business indeed. In a report produced at the end of last year by Spanish newspaper El País, they noted that European corporate giants such as Ericsson, Airbus, German conglomerate Siemens, Italy's Leonardo Spa, and British firms G4S, as well as Spain's Indra and Thales, don't just provide tools and offer services to European Union states and agencies. They also participate as experts in the drawing up of European Union reports on the future of the security industry. The security for sale investigation carried out by 22 European journalists in 11 countries notes security companies make 30 billion euros per year in the European Union, with Indra and Airbus among the top 10 recipients of European security funds. You will forgive me for being self-referential for a moment while I recall my 2011 essay, "Those Who Die to Keep Us Safe." I quote myself. Nick Buckles, the chief executive of G4S, would not discuss the company. But last year, he told analysts how its justice business in the Netherlands blossomed in 1 week after the 2002 assassination of a politician with an anti-immigrant and law and order agenda. There is nothing like a political crisis to stimulate a bit of change, Mr. Buckles said, end quote. That's what undocumented immigrants are, a bit of political change. Except that the security guards working for the company that Mr. Buckles represented at the time had a big degree of responsibility for the gruesome death of 11 asylum seekers who were awaiting deportation in a detention center at Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands on Thursday, October 27th, 2005. If anyone is tempted to believe that these are all news, they should be aware that on May 4th of this year, the UK announced that G4S was awarded a new contract to continue running Brookhouse Immigration Removal Center. In spite of the blatant abuse allegations that have plagued the company for years. Undercover footage broadcast by the BBC last month showed the G4S detention center depicting vulnerable detainees being abused, insulted, restrained, and humiliated by guards amid drug abuse and suicide attempt. When in 2011, the then CEO of G4S said, "There is nothing like a political crisis to stimulate a bit of change," I am sure he didn't quite forecast the full scope of his words. A constant state of the so-called migration crisis, fueled by the rise of right-wing ideologies across the continent and the turmoil caused by Brexit, surely proved his statement profitable. In the aforementioned "Are Prisons Obsolete?", Professor Davis details how gender structures the American prison system. Our European industrial detention complex is no different. Women face rape, sexual abuse, harassment, denial of gender-specific medical services, and the stigmatization reserved for the most vulnerable among the vulnerable. Professor Davis writes, quote, "Ideologies of sexuality, and particularly the intersection of race and sexuality, have had a profound effect on the representations of and treatment received by women of color, both within and outside prison. And I would like to recall the way that women in European detention centers face inhumane conditions while giving birth, and that is, if they are even allowed to do so. The numerous reports of rape in the hands of security guard or fellow male detainees, or the separation of families and children under the pretense of safety and security. Being a woman in a European detention center can be a very dangerous proposition. Both the American and European prison industrial complexes are rooted in the coloniality of the surveillance state designed to punish black and brown bodies for crossing imaginary borders. Ultimately, our modern versions are updated projects whose main task is to preserve a social and racial hierarchy under the pretense of protection and safety. Safety for whom and at whose expense? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Flavia. Speaking of intergenerational solidarity, I co-hosted a intersectional feminist radio station or program for a couple of years, and Flavia is the one who was like, "You need to get that program. You need to get on air, and they need to make room for women." I don't identify as a woman anymore, but at that time it was really empowering. Thank you, Olave. Thank you, Flavia. We're gonna move on to Olave Basabose. You can explain yourself what the deal is with the names, but I love them. Or not, that's also fine. Olave.
I'm a little bit taller than most people here. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so my pen name is Nduwanje, and it means literally, in Kirundi, it means I am my own. Long story, but another time. About 3 or 4 years ago, my body and mind endured a head-on collision with the imperialistic, capitalist, cis-heteronormative, white supremacist, ableist patriarchy that we live in. Just go right at it. I was left with a body I hated and a mind I didn't trust. My body felt like a prison and a burden. I hated its inexorable commitment to existing, the way it kept breathing, eating, drinking, needing, wanting, and hurting. My mind had lost all of its former elasticity. It could no longer bend, adapt, forget, silence, ignore, and mute. I remember thinking that I had finally broken, and not in equal smooth parts, but in a myriad of shards. Everything in me was sharp and cutting. Every friendship, commitment, memory, desire, dream, and nightmare alike cut and hurt. So much so that even the taste of food, the touch of light, the rhythm of music, the tenderness of touch, it would all pain me, nauseate me, repulse me. I would huddle my psyche in the center of my being, hours on end, unable and unwilling to think or feel. I was suffocating, no, drowning in an ocean of fear, guilt, shame, remorse, sorrow, and anger. Oh, the anger. An anger that I had stored in a lifelong practice of retreats, concessions, explanations, and agreeing to disagree. The anger laced every one of those cutting shards of my psyche like the poisonous and intoxicating stench of refined petroleum fuel. Each shard's reflective coating consisted of the obsessive glare of guilt and shame. Weighted down by the gravitational pull of sorrow, their cutting edges were wetted by the blood-thinning properties of fear and anxiety. When I say that Black, trans-inclusive feminists saved my life, I mean that quite literally. Without their love, nurture, and uplifting, I would not be here. Their healing hands, their generous bodies, insightful minds, and simply magical souls saved me. Without them, I would still be lost and alone in the little darkened room I occupied in the psychiatric clinic I had been involuntarily committed. These giantesses of thought and practice taught, nurtured, encouraged, and reprimanded me into a commitment to healing. Under their guidance, I learned to cherish my fear and anxiety as the nourishing soil of my courage and tenderness. I learned to vanquish my guilt and shame with kindness and transparency. I learned to make space, no, to make a nest, a warm and loving nest for my sorrow. And I learned to charge my every pore, my every cell with the electric power of my anger. I am angry. So very angry. I am angrier than I have ever been in my life. I am angry and I know it is good. I rejoice for it and in it. In essence, I am angry because I have the hope and the belief that oppression can and must be brought to an end. Or perhaps it is fate, or it is naivete, but whatever it may be, that anger has brought me loving purpose, joyful communion, passionate commitment, and hope-giving solidarity. So, I carry my anger close to my heart. I tuck it under my armpits. I fold it neatly into the knot of my waist strap. I hold it dear and near, sheltered, cherished, and valued. Yes, anger is a kind of renewable fuel. In a maddening world, anger seems to be inexhaustible. But anger is also a kind of perimeter alarm system. When triggered, it points me to where the violence is, and I posit. The violence of oppression, of entitlement, of exclusion, of exploitation, of hatred is a tactile and material intruder. Anger alarms and directs and fuels our legitimate and righteous outrage. But in the words of Solange Knowles, you got the right to be mad, but when you carry it alone, you find it only getting in the way. So, I offer you my madness. Carry it with me. I will carry yours too. That way, it won't get in our way. But it can be the way we walk upon. I posit. We could turn our combined anger, our concerted anger, our undiluted anger into a kind of yellow brick road. I know it will be a narrow road, curved, winding, and meandering at first, but as we mobilize and cement our respective anger, it will turn into a broad boulevard of grievances, a sturdy and inclusive avenue leading to the Emerald City. A city, I hope, we can all agree we need to evacuate and then burn down to the ground. Maybe it is my anger speaking, but I want to see it burn. This treacherous artifice, this nebulous edifice, this murderous scaffold, this bloody altar to the devils of greed must be desecrated and purged. This church, built out of mass oppression, pillaging, exploitation, and destruction, this church that shelters and harbors whiteness must be unroofed, stripped, and abandoned to the restorative processes of nature. This unholy union of Europe, of Western civilization, of global white supremacy, it must be undone. I posit. Liberation isn't access or entry to privilege. Liberation isn't the kind of entitlement. It is my suspicion that black liberation requires the undoing of white supremacy. Queer liberation calls for the undoing of hetero-cis-sexist patriarchy. Environmental justice necessitates the undoing of the global imperialist capitalist order. Standards of beauty, ability, and participation must be undone to champion disability rights. Undoing isn't improving. It is laying bare and doing away with. The university can't be decolonized without destroying it. Neither the colony nor the settler's place of origins. Our house is necrophilic, and we must lay waste to it. I cannot imagine that what I'm saying is novel here. You must have heard this before, contemplated it, and perhaps committed to it. You must have. Like I said, I'm new to this. I'm not even sure whether I should be standing here before you. I have formulated my positions as theses, but I should have formulated them as questions, because frankly speaking, I don't really know what I'm doing. As a solidarity worker, writer, and politician, I often find myself directionless, confused, and lost. And that often makes me feel quite lonely and overwhelmed. That is why I look for teachers, elders, co-conspirators, and comrades. I posit, let us shun the researchers that do not give back, that do not teach, that mine data and appropriate theory, that repackage it in career-advancing books and publications, and that speak in strange and nebulous language. We need teachers that teach, far beyond the confines of the classroom and the university halls. I sound distrustful, don't I? That is because I am distrustful. So to understand and dismantle, I must think and rethink actions and words, thoughts and deeds, mine and everyone else's. I'm distrustful because this system has polluted my very understanding of reality. So to think beyond that polluted understanding, it means to unthink reality. I dream up novel perspectives, adopt new angles of sights and hearing. I touch and taste differently. I hold myself gingerly and loosely. It is a kind of clowning. This reshaping and unlearning, this dizzying, shaking, and reordering of what I know, think, do, and say. I try to write it down. These new tastes and sound, these alternative shapes and figures. I try to codify and archive these visionary glimpses of alternate futures, unknown pasts, and hidden presents. So I posit. Activism is the business of manufacturing potential, trading futures, and accumulating directional hope. We can and must write, sing, dance, paint, and play out these alternatives realities into existence. Alternatives, imagined, enacted, or otherwise, are weapons in our arsenal. So let us dream ferociously and valiantly. I say all this, and I feel an undercurrent of violence moving and lurking in secret folds of my gut. It is the threat of destruction, of revolt, of rebellion, of chaos. It scares me, kind of, and it is also enticing for the same reasons. Because what if all I desire is the reversal of the direction of violence? The oppression of the oppressor has a ring to it, doesn't it? It holds a kind of promise of retribution and perhaps of justice. Or is my fear of violence also the fear of losing and of risking and losing the little comfort, the little stability, the little safety, the compromised freedom I and others have eked out in a hostile world? I posit. We stand to lose the little we have. This work, this commitment to liberation, is a commitment to loss. Loss of comfort, of privilege, of status, of stability. We must lose it all to the fires that must cleanse this emerald city of ours. As long as we are its abject citizens, we must become reckless and uncompromising saboteurs. My humble suggestion is, let us at least be malignant agents, deliberate intruders, conscientiously contentious and oppositional hostages. Thank you.
Yes, yes. I'm so lucky to be able to call Olave a dear friend of mine, and thank you so much for sharing your anger with us, for sharing also your vulnerability and your insecurity with us, and for this fiery dream that you have. Thank you so much. How are you feeling? You don't. I know you're doing a lot of listening. We are going to get to the conversational part, even though this is already, of course, a long conversation that's happening here. I'm finding it so nourishing and so interesting, and I hope you feel the same. We're going to move on now to Joy, who will gift us with a performance.
Okay. People back there. Okay. Yeah, you can just wow or WOW or YOY or some questions I might ask. Why do you think I am angry all the time? Why am I here? Why am I doing your emotional labor? Why do I doubt myself? Why do you care what is between my legs? Why do I have to explain myself to you? Why do you get to have all the fun? Why do you think I am angry all the time? Why am I so tired all the time? Why do I have to explain myself to you? Why do I have to explain myself to you? Why don't I know the language of my ancestors? Why do you care what is between my legs? Why am I so tired all the time? Why do you get to have all the fun? Why can't I have what you have? Why am I in pain all the time? Why do I get harassed at the airport? Why do you get to have all the fun? Why is my body politicized, exoticized, sexualized, and commodified? Why am I always working but always broke? Why can't I have what you have? Why do you think I'm angry all the time? Why do I have to assimilate? Why do I feel more powerful when I wear lipstick? Why do I still work for minimum wage? Why do you get to have all the fun? Why are you laughing? Why do you care what is between my legs? Why am I so tired all the time? Why do you think you can touch me without asking? Why do you think I am aggressive, abrasive, scary, or threatening? Why don't I see people that look like me when I go to the museum? Why do I get harassed at the airport? Why is my body politicized, sexualized, exoticized, tokenized, and commodified? Why do you get to have all the fun? Why can't I have what you have? Why do you get to have all the fun? Why is my history erased? Why is the divine within me not acknowledged? Why am I cleaning up your mess? Why do you think I am angry all the time? Why do I feel ashamed? Why do I have to explain myself to you? Why do I have to explain myself to you? Why can't we talk about white supremacy? Why are you here? Why are people afraid of femmes? Why are people afraid of femmes? Why is my assailant not held accountable? Why do you think I am angry all the time? Why am I so tired all the time? Why do you think you can touch me without asking? Why do you think I am angry all the time? Why am I doing your emotional labor? Why am I here?
Questions we have asked ourselves so many times. The conversation is already happening. About the conversation. A conversation about the conversation. But the actual conversation is going to start again now. I would like to invite Gina Dent to share her thoughts with us.
Thank you for the welcome. And I wasn't refusing to speak earlier. It's just that as a person newly arrived to the Netherlands yesterday, I was eager to listen before saying a few words to get us further into this conversation. And I'm looking forward very much to the exchange and to this week. I hear the echo of my own voice, and I heard the echoes of others as they were speaking, and it is a bit hard to ignore the ethnological resonance of this space. So, given my own areas of interest, it's making me think a lot about the things we will be able to talk about this week. So I should introduce myself. I was called a scholar and an activist, and if I spoke as the former, I would take longer than 10 minutes. So I'll speak as the latter. I am here, I think, primarily to be talking from the activist work that I've done for many years, and because it's called intergenerational, I realize that because there's some gray in my hair now, I have to make peace with the fact that I'm on a particular side of the intergenerational dialogue. Of course, it's an interesting thing to think about because I've spent all of my activist life actually working between generations. And so it's sometimes hard for me to remember exactly where I sit. I also, in my work, in my scholarly work, in my teaching, and in my activism, I've always been particularly concerned with my own situatedness as a US citizen, and especially the way in which Black Americans are often excused from the impact of that citizenship, and Black Americans are used as examples, exemplars, in terms of contributions, cultural and other, that almost set the terms in many parts of the world where I travel. So from my own training in comparative literature as a scholar, and from my work from the time I was a young person active in anti-apartheid struggles, struggles in Central America, and also struggles against capitalism at home, I've always tried to bring to the conversation some sense of how we might temper our excitement and enthusiasm about some of American contributions. So I'm going to say a little bit about one contribution, and that is my relationship to the prison abolition movement, which I have been involved in for, I guess, over 20 years. And that movement is particularly exciting to me because it always brings together so many of the issues that we find around the world and so many intersectional issues. So it is itself, by its very nature, an intersectional investigation when we think through the prison. This, of course, is what Nelson Mandela or Dostoevsky meant when they said, if you want to understand a society, then look inside its prisons. I'm pretty sure a woman somewhere said that sometime as well. But that's always something that I've done as a part of the activism that I've shared with Angela and with many others. And when we travel, we often make sure to visit a prison while we're doing some other part of our work. And so it was amazing for me to hear already from Flavia and from, mostly from Flavia here, about the lack of an understanding that the prison industrial complex is actually a global phenomenon, not only an American one. In fact, the very idea of a prison industrial complex, which relies on globalization and relies on an idea of the economic, social, cultural, political network that undergirds the prison, necessitates a global perspective, even if the US is often the exemplar of the worst of it, both as originator of our modern prison system and as now a place that's targeted as having a problem with what's called mass incarceration. But as I think maybe some of you in this room already understand, the problem of mass incarceration is actually a way to avoid truly thinking about abolition. Because of course, if we have a problem only of mass incarceration, it's because if we just reduced it to appropriate numbers, we would have a regular incarceration situation. But prison abolition causes us to look differently at society and at what our solutions would be. And in fact, in my prison visits inside Europe, it's been very easy to see issues that are available to me now in looking around this room, but that are not always available when I'm speaking at universities or other places. That is the crisis of the end of colonialism and globalization that result in certain patterns of immigration and arrest and incarceration that mean that going inside a prison, even in a country like Sweden, is to go and meet my sisters of color inside the prison. It's very clear to me that the best lesson we might have to teach our young people about what's going on occurs inside of those spaces where you only have to talk to people for a brief period of time to think about crises of health, borders, sex work and sex trafficking, domestic violence, capitalism, and every other social problem, obviously including race, that we would want to engage. And so I'm happy to be here not to talk about how the United States has, again, another answer to the problem, because I fear that the answer that was given in the 19th or 18th centuries of the prison is perhaps not the best gift that we could leave, but to talk about prison abolition together with you as a kind of challenge to the segmentation of our political environment. Today we were asked to think in terms also of solidarity, and so I just want to close with a less easy, I think, example of solidarity that I'm involved with today. Even on our arrival here and our plans to come to the Netherlands, we were told that there were some activists in the local environment who were being currently suppressed. And those are ones who are involved in the BDS, or Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement in support of Palestine. And I want to mention this because, of course, it would be easy for me to speak as a Black American about the struggles for racialized people and for Black people in the United States, but it's become increasingly clear that my responsibility is to speak about Islamophobia and racism against Muslims and Arabs, and also about the ways in which our prison industrial complex needs to be understood in terms of other people besides Black people in the United States. So I hope, that's okay, thank you. I'm trying to take very little time. So I hope that in our conversation today, we will be able to, even amongst these ethnological objects, not be able to position ourselves as racial or ethnic examples of our own particular types, but to have a conversation in which we engage across what we perceive as difference in a way where we can internalize and exchange from other points of view. So, thank you.
We're all human. This is a human program. I'm human, so things are a bit. We've been building up, and you've heard a lot of speakers. We're getting ready for the final speaker. Are you still feeling it? Are you excited about it? It's not that you have to give me a good feeling. I'm just wanting to check in with you. Okay, we're gonna get ready for the final speaker. Needs no introduction, I don't think. Angela Davis, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. No, that's okay. You don't have to. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I guess it's great to be back in Amsterdam again. Thank you very much. I hadn't realized how long it has been since I was last here. 16? And I guess I came for the first time perhaps 25 years or so ago. Thank you for reminding me, 1995. And it just occurred to me that such a gathering would not have been possible in 1995. And as someone who has been involved in activist efforts literally all of my life, I think it is so important for us to count our victories, to acknowledge what we have achieved. Of course, when one looks at the state of white supremacy in the world, the state of Islamophobia, it appears as if nothing has changed. But I think it's always important for us to remind ourselves that the work we do does make a difference. And sometimes we can't witness that difference immediately. Sometimes it takes 20 years. Sometimes it takes 50 years. Sometimes it takes 100 years. And therefore, the theme of the conversation this evening, intergenerationality, is essential to acknowledge. I really would like to thank all of the presenters before me, from the wonderful saxophone solo by, I thought I just saw Sana sitting over there, but now I don't see her anymore. Oh, there she is, there she is. And again, I think it's so important to incorporate art and music in our deliberations and not assume that the music that we hear or the performance that we hear is a moment of relief. But that art can actually teach us, that there's an epistemological value to that art in the sense that it can often allow us to feel what we have not yet learned how to conceptualize. And this is why this entire weekend, moving together activism, art, and education is so important. So thank you very much for inviting me. And I'd like to thank Dzodan and Nawal and Flavia and Olave and Joy for the wonderful and Gina, of course, for the wonderful presentations. Since we've been asked to be brief, I will be brief. But first, I do want to evoke Gloria Vecca and her work. And Philomena Esset. They were the ones who invited me years ago. And I am so happy that there is a discussion unfolding in this country now about white innocence and about Dutch racism. Because I must admit, during my first visit, many people responded to those notions as oxymoronic. Dutch racism? Well, What I think I want to do in the few minutes that are left is to focus on the ways in which what we often consider to be marginal issues can enact vast transformations. Oftentimes people will say, well, if you're talking about the prison industrial complex, which has been multiply invoked during this evening, of course you have to talk about men, because men constitute the absolute majority of people who are in prison. And one of the first times I came to this country was to interview women in prison, because Flavia, many were under the impression that along with the Scandinavian system, it was here in the Netherlands that you found the best practices with respect to prisons. Well, I'll talk about that visit another time. But what I do want to say is that by focusing on women, and of course we have to construct the category women as broadly as possible, not only including race and ethnicity, but also recognizing, as Olave pointed out, that we need to use a feminism that is trans-inclusive. And so what we have learned by looking very specifically at the experiences of women behind bars is that there is a continuum, there is a continuity, there are issues that directly link people who could never imagine going to prison, or who would never imagine themselves in direct proximity with prison populations, but that there are issues that link us all to those who are in cages. And certainly the relationship between institutional violence or state violence on the one hand, and individual violence or intimate violence on the other begins to allow us to understand the way in which these forms of violence, these violences reproduce each other. And that if we do talk about abolishing prisons, abolishing the prison industrial complex, we can't abolish the violence of that institution without also making inroads in the struggle to purge our worlds of intimate violence, of gender violence. And we've also learned that looking directly at the experiences of trans prisoners allows us to recognize the extent to which the institution itself is a gendering institution, so that it's not simply a question of the particular circumstances surrounding people who identify as trans inside prisons, but it's about acknowledging that the apparatus itself serves an ideological purpose, and that the apparatus itself generates and reproduces the binary gender system. So you see what I mean? You can start with something that appears to be relatively marginal, and that might seem to affect a relatively small group of people, but it gives us insights into the larger picture. And I think that feminism allows us to make that move, to move from what appears to be very specific to the more general. And I mention this because in the Netherlands, the Dutch have maybe I shouldn't talk about the Dutch, but I mean, I got the sense in the past that this is a country in which the universal rules, right? And the universal confers sameness, right? So all people are equal, but not Muslims and not black people, but all people. And we see the way in which that universal enacts a kind of tyranny which invisibilizes precisely those who need access to the processes that will engender justice and equality. So I'm really happy that we're having a session like this and all of the events that are happening this week, because it seems to me that that we may begin to recognize, for example, the extent to which the Palestinian struggle, as marginalized as it often is key to the struggle for justice for all. And I want to close. I just want to close by saying that the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for Black lives, that has spread all over the planet, in the US would not have become what it became without the contributions of Palestinians. As a matter of fact, Palestinians were the very first people in the world to offer solidarity to the protesters in Ferguson in 2014. And also interactions both on an activist and a scholarly level with Palestinian activists and scholars have helped us to conceptualize abolition in a broader sense, have helped us to acknowledge the extent to which the carceral technologies that some people assume are confined to these places we call prisons can invade quotidian life, and that any attempt to call for abolition of prisons, and now we also say abolish the police, that call has to recognize the extent to which carcerality has begun to structure our everyday lives. And if one wants to see the most persuasive example of that, one looks to the Israeli occupation of Palestine. So I want to close with the call to think very deeply about the extent to which the call for justice for Palestine is as essential to justice struggles around the planet as the call to end apartheid in South Africa was in the 1980s and the 1990s. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Angela. It's so beautiful to have intergenerational solidarity in action right here on stage by having your presence here and you sharing your perspective with us. We're gonna move around a bit the stuff that's here on stage to get ready for the conversation. And after we're all set, Sana's gonna come on stage again and delight us with another small piece so that we can let everything that's been said, because I realize it was a very rich offering that was here on stage just now. We can let it all sink in, have a moment to collect ourselves while listening to the beautiful tunes of Sana. So let's do that together. So now a brief moment where maybe not so brief, but I would really like to hear from you. Let's take some time to take one or two questions from you all. And then we can move on to the conversation between our speakers, and then at the end we'll also come back to you and take another two questions. Can our people with the microphones get ready? And can you all also get ready? Perfect. There's one person with a microphone. There's one person in the back with a microphone. So please wait until the person comes to you, and please keep your question short, or they will leave mid-sentence. I'm just warning you. I'm just telling you what they told me. Okay. I see a person there.
Thank you. My name is Umayya. This is called Activism, Art and Education. The people around the world, and mainly Europeans, have voted Israel to be the next place for next Eurovision. Hop on it. What do you suggest for showing the dynamics of solidarity next year? Sorry.
Is it addressed to a certain person, or can anybody take this question?
To the woman who made me carry my afro since the 60s.
Okay.
Resist. Resist. I think.
How more can I resist?
Pardon me?
I'm Palestinian. How more can I resist? How can I resist? I think we should use it. It is art, it's popular art, it's democratic. We should use it in a different way, not just say go down. We should use it. I don't know how more to resist.
Well, when I used that term, I didn't mean it simplistically. I assume that there's a BDS here. Is there a BDS? Boycott, divestment, sanctions movement? You say no. Well, it might be important to find out who is actually going to be present at the festival, and to contact the artists and to put pressure on the artists. I mean, we do this all the time. Lauryn Hill was going to perform in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and the concert was all scheduled. We engaged her in conversation, and after recognizing that she would be violating a boycott that represents the ideas and the thrust of Palestinian civil society, she decided to cancel the concert. Michael Bennett is well, I guess you might call him a cultural figure because he's a football player who was scheduled to participate not very long ago in a delegation of the National Football League to Israel. So some of us who were involved in BDS got in touch with him, and he not only refused to participate, but he issued public statements condemning the occupation. So I think that it might be important to try to, I'm sorry that I don't know who's agreed to participate or the specifics of the festival. But you know, certainly this is something that BDS in Europe should undertake. I mean, I can't say more specifically, because I think we have to bring, you know, all of our knowledge and all of our organizing experiences and our vision as artists together to figure out, you know, how we make this move, which is, given the power of the Zionist lobby, so difficult. But I guess what I will say is that we have to figure out how to counteract the assumption that to support Palestine is anti-Semitic. And, you know, Jews who have in their own personal background experience of the Holocaust have spoken out and have said, we do not want this to happen again. If one looks at some of the international formations, like the, for example, the tribunal, what is it called? The Russell Tribunal on Palestine. That tribunal was initiated largely by Jewish people who have experience of the Holocaust in their background. So I think this is something that we really need to take on. First of all, we have to point out that when we say no to racism, we're saying no to Islamophobia. We're also saying no to anti-Semitism. We have to make that passionately clear. And I think that this is a period during which those messages need to be transmitted. Perhaps it's more important than ever before. But thank you so much for the question.
Could I just add a little practical note, and perhaps a strategical note? I think we have about a year, and I'm pretty sure there are people here who are sort of, I don't know, people from the gay community, the queer community. Do I hear anybody? Yes. I mean, I may be overreaching here, but I'm pretty sure we can make or break Eurosong Festival. Okay, so especially the gay white males amongst us. I think there's room for really a concerted effort to resist the pinkwashing of Israel. And you know, I think we can be within our communities, we can have that conversation and really fight. We have a year to fight this, and I think it's appropriate.
And I just want to add quickly, talking from situatedness, as a Muslim, it's really difficult to talk about Israel or Palestine or criticize Islam without being an anti-Semite. And so I think a lot of us shy away from engaging in that conversation, especially in the Netherlands, where Islamophobia is so normalized, it's difficult to speak out. So I haven't been speaking out on this publicly because it has so much repercussions that sort of can break you already. So I want to lay the responsibility on, in this case, also on the white people in the audience and who have networks and who might have less to lose than people of color or Muslims. So to be aware of your position and to use that position to raise more awareness and to also to organize. And I think it's a good, valid point to say that we can use it, but we need to figure out how to use it, right? So do we want to boycott, or do you want to raise awareness in what's actually happening in Palestine?
Thank you. One more question. One more question. Yes, here in the front.
Hi guys, thank you so much for your words, first of all. I really had a question because as a black woman and as a Muslim woman, I often find myself studying in white spaces, working in white spaces, and you often hear just racist remarks or microaggressions, not even specifically to black people, but also LGBT people. And I find it really hard to pick my battles because I want to speak, but also doing emotional labor for other people can be very draining. So I find it really hard to navigate when do I just be silent or laugh this off, or when do I speak up? So do you have any tips or even mantras or even anything like that that can help me navigate through those spaces? To anyone on the panel, by the way.
Okay. As the Muslim black woman in the panel, I feel addressed, therefore I'll try to answer. I think first and foremost, you have to take care of yourself and your well-being. I think your mental health and the space you're in at that moment is really important, because a lot of these remarks touch you. And a lot of these remarks are hurtful, painful, are stressful. So first and foremost, I don't think it's weak to walk away from such a situation. I do think you have to pick your battles and see how you can go. What I use is irony, and I try to ask questions. That is something that helps me a lot to navigate, but I have had a period in which I observed and I wrote about it, for instance. So there are different ways to navigate. Don't feel bad if you don't say anything. One thing that I would advise against is to laugh along or laugh away. I would never do that. I would rather leave the space than engage. So you choose how to engage, but don't diminish. Don't go along with it. I think by going along with it, you're justifying the remarks that are being made. So be careful with that. But otherwise, I do think about your own mental health, your own well-being, and you can always postpone it, right? You don't have to because a lot of things are happening at the moment that you're hearing that. You have to process what's happening, you have to think about a proper response, and you have to also check what your emotions are. Are you feeling sad? Are you angry, etc., etc.? So I think it's important to also postpone some of the reactions that you have, and it doesn't make you weak if you postpone it. If you come back to the same people who were making the remarks a week later, or a month, or a year later, and address them then if you feel comfortable enough.
Yeah, I just have a small contribution. What I found helpful is to develop a repertoire of responses in advance, so that you're not so emotionally affected by the microaggression. You can just pull it out of your pocket, say it, and then you don't have to go home and think, oh wow, I should have done this, I should have done that. And the other point is to not think about individual responses as doing the work that really needs to be done. To locate your response within a community that you build. Too often we try to do this work by ourselves, and we can never accomplish it alone. So make sure you have a community, perhaps even just to vent, or someplace to go, so you don't have to carry all of the emotional baggage with you all the time. But the repertoire of responses is really good. You can write down, 1 through 25, and pull out number 10 when somebody says that, or pull out number 12.
So I wasn't going to say anything because this is going to be a very long conversation. Two short things, though. One is really, this isn't about individuals. It has to be something about organizing and being communities. And since I came here first, Philomena Essed invited me to the Netherlands, I think in 1994 was my first visit. So it's been a long time since I've been coming here, and it looks, as Angela pointed out, very different. So the opportunities to be organized are stronger, and I think that can help. But actually, because this is also an art week, I thought it might be nice to invoke the work of Adrian Piper. How many of you know Adrian Piper's work? No, because Adrian Piper did it through her artwork. When she walked through the city of New York, she had cards, pieces of art that were responses to various kinds of interactions. And so she was not only prepared with a repertoire, but she had artwork to go along with the occasion. So it's important for us to invoke those important, pivotal, pioneering artists who have helped to pave the way for us to think.
Thank you.
When we talk about blackness, it's a construct that has been deliberately constructed as the negation of whiteness, right? So to consider that it's a category of group of not even humans, that are outside of time and place. That is the exclusion. To then say that black women are excluding others is a bit of to me, ontologically, just sort of, it gets me in a rap that I'm like, you're saying that people who are used as a device, as a negation, as a construct to uphold whiteness, themselves, when they claim that blackness that they are imposed on them, are being exclusionary?
Mm-hmm.
How?
I wonder though if that's the conversation, because But you know what I mean? Because there's black women amongst each other saying, who is black? Exactly. Am I black? Am I a black woman? Yeah. And we're constantly negotiating our differences because we're not all of the same sexuality, of the same, you know, religious identities. We're not of the same class, etc. And these are the differences, I think, some of the differences that Angela was also, and this is so difficult. We are so out of time. But I also want to ask Joy, maybe as a final question, when we move beyond, I'm sorry, Joy. Joy's like, why? Because as an artist, you're working through some of these questions through art, and in your work. I know that you specifically create spaces for artists of color, and also spaces that are all inclusive, and you use words, but also go beyond words to create coalitions and solidarities. Can you speak on your perspective on that?
Sure. I thought I was going to be able to get away with just listening to all these beautiful people and not say anything. I think, it's tricky, and I think I always have to be present in the trickiness of having a multitude of identities. And so the short answer is I don't have an answer. I can say that within my work and within my life, because I don't really separate those things. I'm not able to separate those things. A lot of it includes community building and also engaging in dialogue with people, and to try and to be really transparent about, oh yeah, like I can be in a room and be identified as a black woman, and then I can say, actually, I don't feel black enough, or I don't feel woman enough, or what does that mean? I think that's really important, and those are some of the things that I try to use my position as an artist and sometimes as an educator to really keep those things lubricated so that we can move through these things, so that we can begin to say, like, oh, well, I don't want to dishonor any of my multiple identities or any of my legacies or any of my heritage at all, but how do I stay busy with, is there space for this? Can I crack this open? And a lot of it is through making work where I am exposing what my particular relation is, or what the relationality of those sort of ingredients are, not to really find a solution, but to have more questions and to invite people to ask these questions with me so that I don't have to be the only one busy with these identities. I think that's really important, to also invite people into, like, oh, I'm asking this question. Oh, but you're also asking this question, and you ask this question, and we may have all different answers. But that's, I mean, I think that's how we learn and grow and evolve as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I promised you 2 more questions. Oh. So if you have, there's the microphones again. If you have not only a question, but also a comment or a contribution, just as long as you keep it brief, we can take them. Here's one person.
Okay. Hello.
Oh, sorry. Dominique, hello.
I've been waiting. Well, I just want to say I'm very impressed and very happy, but I want to be very brief, which is not a very strong point I have. I question is, I'm a very intersectional person. I'm Jewish, queer, black, white, whatever I am. I'm so many things that I'm like, I'm looking always for these alliances. And I think, even though there's so many difficulties going on, war and oppression, I feel we're at a tipping point. Look at the people in the room. I just see all these colors and people who are like completely in the struggle, and you're all in there, you're in the deep trenches of it, but we are in a tipping point. Those crumbling structures of power are going to give way under the weight of what we are doing, and that's what I wanted to contribute. I'm very thankful.
maybe in the back, yes.
Okay, sorry. Hi, I have a question for Professor Davis. I'm here. So I would like to know, when you are invited to give a lecture or to integrate a program, how much you get to know about the institution's policy to eradicate all those things that we are talking about, or the lack of it. And I just want to highlight gender violence, but among all other things. And I would like to know if you already refused some invitation, and what's the limit? Is there a limit for institutional coalitions? Thank you.
She's going to answer.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Wow, that's a hard question. And thank you for raising it. Because I know that I give presentations at institutions that are totally involved in the reproduction of racism or gender violence. I actually assume that none of the places I inhabit, whether temporarily or long-term, are free of these violences. So that's the first assumption that I make. And sometimes I'm speaking at a university and the president of the university is there, and I've met with the students and I've learned about the problems, and I feel absolutely compelled to represent the students, despite the fact that I might not get invited back again. But that's the way it is. That's the work that one does. I don't think that it's possible to assume that there are any pure spaces. So wherever, even among ourselves, the impact of all of these violences can be clearly seen. But I do want to say, I was actually going to say something in relation to the last question. And the question before that about intergenerationality.
Go for it.
Because I realize that I'm the old person here. I mean, if I look at the panel, I realize that it's important to say that those of us who have been in the struggle for a very long time and have aged in the struggle, and believe me, generations fly by. You'll be saying this at some point. I mean, I was like 25 years old when I was fired from my job at UCLA, and now I'll be 75 next year, so that was like 50 years ago. But I do realize that I have a responsibility to try to keep in touch with what's happening among younger generations, because it is the younger generations, and it's, when I visit universities, it's the students and the workers I like to talk to find out, what is happening, what is the nature of the institutional heteropatriarchal racism there. But I also feel a responsibility to keep up with the cultural production of young people, because I think, one of the problems is that people age and they take their culture with them. The popular culture of their youth remains the popular culture their entire lives. And for me, that's been jazz. So I still love jazz. I absolutely love jazz. But I have to keep up so that I can, recognize a Janelle Monáe video when it's in, in Joy's presentation, or Childish Gambino, right?
Now they're very
And I really do think that older people need to try to stay in touch with the developments of the younger generations, because that is the only way we will be able to create these intergenerational relations that are not based on hierarchical assumptions, that because you've done more, you've learned more, you've experienced more, that somehow you have all of the knowledge and all of the wisdom. And it's often the case that precisely because you've done more, experienced more, learned more, there are more barriers to your imagination. So that you have to be able to be in touch with younger people and recognize that that is where the impulse for radical struggle really comes from. It comes from the youth that Gina was talking about. But you know, thank you for raising the question of the complicated ways in which we try to do the work that we think is going to eventually help to bring justice to our world. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Flavia, I haven't heard your voice. Do you want to offer some thoughts, or do you? Yeah.
No, I prefer to cede my space. I prefer to cede my space to the stars of the night. I'm local here. People can hear me rant anytime. But everyone came for Gina and for Angela, and I'm delighted to hear them speak.
I'm glad everyone's here, and I'm glad to have heard all of your thoughts and perspectives and experimental, very, very, very personal reflections. I'm talking about Olave, I'm talking about Joy, I'm talking about Flavia's work on European borders and the violence of European borders, who's been doing that work, that lonely work, very, very heavy emotional labor. Of looking at those numbers, and she's one of the few people in the Netherlands who's doing that work. So I want to... And Nawal for speaking out within the university, and also with your black sisters, because sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that are most like us, So I want to thank you also. Olave, you are a recently published writer. She contributed to the book Zwart. If you haven't already got a copy yet, you should. And
shameless plug.
No, it's shameless, completely shameless. And also a public speaker. I've heard you speak many times. Trans Remembrance Day, for example. You spoke also at the recent demo. Such a joyful gathering, actually. But we were talking about that day coming together to protest against the violence against a queer black young man. And your words moved me. And they also, they made me sad, but they also gave me hope. And the coming together gave me hope. Thank you so much for your work. Joy, who's doing groundbreaking work, thinking about movement and liberation and how these things connect, and creating spaces for artists of color, and also creating spaces for all those invested in justice, invested in joyful movement towards liberation, physically and also figuratively. And they're actually organizing a color block. And Joy, do you want to take a few moments to talk about that, because you're fundraising for it, and that's where the party tonight is about that.
Party, sexy land, sexy land.
That's the actual venue.
I'm DJing. Yeah, I'm DJing after this. Come over. Color block. So backing up, because I want to give space to both. If you are hashtag friendly, you can look up Ponderosa Dance. That's where I do a lot of this work. I'm organizing Color Block, which is a space primarily for artists of color to talk about many of the things that we're already talking about, but in a somatic way, and how we as artists and movers and makers can use performance and art to sort of address these issues. As Angela Davis also pointed out, through art, you can also sort of crack open, before you have gotten to the theoretical, you can crack open in a different way through movement or through writing or through images, some of these things that we're all really busy with. There's also a caucus organizing called Freedom to Move, where we're getting artists and activists together to talk about these notions of freedom and movement in relation to, again, all of the identities that we have, and privilege and oppression and marginalized, and also how we situate ourselves and how we can use where we are, again, as artists, activists, and educators to shift things, because I believe that we are on a tipping point, as this lovely person in the audience said. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you. And I want to... I want to thank Angela Davis and Gina Dent for joining us today, for making a local conversation also international, for sharing your reflections and your questions, and for doing that humbly but also powerfully, and for being the catalyzers for this gathering, but also for sharing the work that you've done for a long time on prison abolition, on solidarity building through difference. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you also to everybody here for sticking around, for listening, for opening your hearts and minds. I also want to thank the curatorial team that made today possible. Amal, Quincy, Nadia, Mickey, Boyana, Senami, Simona, Gabriela, Etzel, Damiana, and Aisha. Moving Together, Activism, Art, and Education is co-organized by the SNDO, School for New Dance Development, and produced by the Academy of Theater and Dance as part of AIR, Artist in Residence program of the Amsterdam University of the Arts and the Research Center for Material Culture. And there are many, many institutions that mobilized funds to make this whole week possible. The program is in the red booklets that you got. There's a whole week of conversations happening. There's a keynote speech by Angela Davis at the end. There's so much richness. So if you feel like it, there's a lot of interesting things that you can attend as well. Sorry? Where's the party? Good question. Sexyland, right now, actually, right now. Google Sexyland Amsterdam Noord. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Hodan.
You're welcome.